everyone. This webcast is essentially just another in the long line of webcasts that we've been putting together to sort of illustrate how many various law enforcement agencies around the world essentially are using iPhone forensics to obtain evidence, live evidence from iPhone devices. And we've covered the iPhone and iPhone 3G in past webcasts. Today I wanted to focus on the iPhone 3GS. A lot of the tools you're going to be seeing in this webcast are currently law enforcement restricted. I don't currently release them to just the general public. However, O'Reilly at some point in the near future will be releasing a iPhone forensics examiner's guide, which will cover the methods that are used to produce these tools. So while you may not have access to the tools unless you're actively in law enforcement, the methods that we use to build these tools should be pretty well available in the near future. A lot of what we do here is it's nothing new. A lot of these are based on a lot of open source tools that are out there, such as Xphone tool and a few others. We use a tool called iRecovery as well. And it's just really implementing all of the work that's involved in putting all of these pieces together. That's really where a majority of the work is done. The iPhone 3GS, when it was released a couple of months ago, it obviously threw a wrench into a lot of the previous forensics techniques. And what we used to do, if you've been following along with the book and with these webcasts, is we used to build these custom firmware bundles. We'd take Apple's firmware and we'd essentially patch it, customize it, and then take advantage of a few vulnerabilities on the device to sort of write our own version of firmware. We were able to put together a forensically safe version of that essentially it would go and do a full rewrite of the OS without touching the user data, and it would allow us to get a Unix environment set up on the phone. Well, when we originally wrote all those tools, of course, we didn't have nearly the open source following that we have now. And so I've gone and retooled pretty much everything we've got. We've rewritten things from the ground up to be able to run much more efficiently and not require all of the command line work that you used to have to put in. The command line work is still obviously useful in some cases, but we really wanted to give law enforcement a suite of tools that were easy to use and allowed them to to do their job without having to be a Unix pro or a Mac geek. So I'm going to share my desktop out here just a minute. And that should be coming online shortly. Do you see that, Catherine?
Yeah, it's up now.
Okay, great. So this just a real brief introduction of the tools that we're currently using, and really all that we do is we release a set of scripts. We don't actually release any binaries. The scripts themselves are very easy to use, and they go and do all the work for you. They essentially go and they'll download Apple's firmware if it's needed. They'll download any open source tools that are needed. They'll make all the appropriate patches on their own. We wanted to do this as well in scripted form so that people could see exactly what's going on, so they could account for what the tools were doing, as opposed to some abstract, obscure commercial tool that's closed source. So you kind of have to take everyone's word for it that it does what it's supposed to do. And what a lot of people are finding, of course, is some of these tools aren't as clean as they advertise to be. So I wanted this suite of tools to be completely transparent. And so when we distribute these to law enforcement, really all you're getting are the 5 shell scripts that you see in this directory. And the scripts go and do all of the work that's necessary to build the environment you need. The other reason we did that is because, we obviously can't go and distribute Apple's firmware or any files from Apple because that would, obviously be a copyright violation. And if you take a look at a lot of the jailbreaking tools that are out there, they've sort of done the same thing. They've steered clear of actually distributing anything from Apple, and they just rely on the files that, you've already downloaded through iTunes and whatnot to operate on. So this is a nice clean-cut way to get set up. There are the current recovery kits. They all run the same. They run on the iPhone first generation, the 3G and the 3GS, and we have different tools for different versions of iPhone firmware. Since 3.1 was just released a few days ago, I thought I would go and show and demonstrate the tool for 3.1 that we're using. I've got an iPhone 3GS here. We're going to have a little bit of fun with it today. I'll just show you how these tools generally work, and then show you some of the data that we can recover from a 3G or a 3GS, some of the evidence that the good guys are using to put the bad guys away. And after that, I'll take any questions that you want to ask. So these tools serve two basic functions. One is if you need to, they can remove the passcode or the backup encryption from an iPhone or iPhone 3GS and what have you. Now, there's no real reason to do that if all you want to do is a low-level disk recovery. I actually get a lot of phones sent to me that are disabled because someone tried the password too many times and it locked up. You can even take a disabled phone and retrieve a raw disk backup from it. That's not really a problem. The only reason you would need to bypass the passcode for, let's say, a law enforcement purpose as opposed to, identity theft and whatnot, would be if you needed to use that phone with some third-party solution, a triage tool such as, Celebrite or what have you. In order for these tools to work, the passcode has to be deactivated on the phone. You also need to deactivate the backup encryption on the phone in order to be able to make a backup with some of these tools. So that, and if you have a, let's say a kidnapping case, for example, where having access to the phone, to the user interface, such as to receive a phone call or to pull in someone's voicemail or email, where you have to have that in a critical time, and that, saving life is more important than the evidence. In those cases, it may be appropriate to bypass the passcode. Now, obviously, there are a lot of nefarious purposes as well, which is one of the reasons we don't just give this away to anybody. But like I said, these methods will at some point be published. So if you're interested in how they work and you wanted to build your own tools. The second function that this suite serves is to perform a live disk recovery. And this is a little different than the way that we documented in the book iPhone Forensics. We used to do an acquiesce recovery where essentially the drive was unmounted. And that caused, a few concerns. We had a few general concerns over some of the methods in the book. They all work and they were all forensically safe, but people didn't like little pieces of it. So we tried to, to remove anything controversial. For example, we didn't really want to have a Unix environment set up on the phone. People kind of paralleled that a little too close to jailbreaking. And even though that in and of itself didn't really stomp on any user data, an unskilled examiner might, for example, run a wrong command or make some mistake which could potentially affect the user data. One of the other things, too, that we wanted to avoid with these tools is we really didn't want to rewrite the operating system of the phone. We didn't even want to jailbreak the kernel, so to speak. And when you jailbreak a kernel, you're making just a modification to the kernel to where it will allow any application that's not signed by Apple to run. And so instead of doing all that, we decided to just do all of this from memory. The only one piece that it actually involves touching the user, or not the user disk, but touching the iPhone, is when we touch the operating system, the protected operating system area of the phone, to set up our live recovery agent. That, especially with the 3GS, is something that we're just going to have to deal with due to, you've got hardware encryption running on the 3GS, and, in order for you to be able to really decrypt the data that's on there, you have to have a process that's masquerading essentially as a legitimate process on the phone.
Hey, Jonathan?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you speak up just a little bit?
Sure.
Okay, sorry about
that. Is this a little bit better?
Yes, that's much better.
Okay.
Thanks.
So, cheap phone. I'm going to have to get a new one now. When you're running all of these tools, it's just important to note up front that a majority of this work is being run directly from memory on the phone. We boot up a custom patched kernel from memory that will run our recovery. And then when you're done, all you have to do to put the phone back the way it was is simply just reboot the phone. it reloads everything back off of disk. So it's much cleaner, much nicer than some of the older methods. The older methods were certainly on a technical level acceptable to those that understood it, but they were also a lot more involved than I think they needed to be. I guess I will show you now what these tools do. And if you're watching and not just on the phone call, I'm going to take a 3GS that I have here, and I'll open up this photo booth on the screen here. Now, for those of you who haven't asked me yet why I'm not in law enforcement, as you can see, I'm clearly too ugly for law enforcement. And I tried to join the military as well. They told me I wasn't ugly enough. So you're just going to have to deal with the image of me on the screen here. And I've got this iPhone 3GS. I'm going to show you. We're dealing with version 3.1, and actually you can see it's flipped the image horizontally, so it looks like version 1.3. But we've got a 3.1 3GS, and I'm going to just set a simple passcode on the device. And now if you turn the device off, when you turn it back on, you get an enter passcode screen. Now this is the condition that most law enforcement agencies get the phone in. They don't really know much of anything about the phone except that it's passcode protected. This is the first place where a lot of people make the mistakes. They will start punching in codes, and there are still a lot of I don't want to say beat cops, but a lot of the officers that are making these, that are securing these devices, they're still making this mistake in the field. So if you're in the law enforcement world right now, first thing you want to make sure of is not to go and tinker with this passcode. You want to just at this point secure the phone and get it back to the lab. And to do that, the easiest way is to just power down the phone, and I'll show you here. You can either hold it in and do a slide to power off, or you can force the device off by holding in both the home and power button. So I've got this device here, and I've just powered it down. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put it into recovery mode. And for those of you who aren't too familiar with recovery mode, it's essentially just a stop boot for the phone. If you hold in the home button while you plug the device into the USB, it will come power up, and then it'll power right into recovery mode. And this will connect to iTunes screen here. It is a recovery mode screen. When you're in this mode, the operating system is down, and none of the radios are up at this point. This is essentially the iPhone's bootloader, and it's saying, I was told not to boot, so I'm not going to boot the operating system. This is another place where a lot of examiners like to place the device when they're securing it. This guarantees that the operating system is down. And so if you've got a case where someone has initiated a secure wipe, let's say on an iPhone 3G, or you're just paranoid because you don't have a Faraday cage in your truck, a lot of people know that the bags are kind of a problem at this point. So putting it in recovery mode kind of tears down the operating system so that it's incapable of connecting out. None of the drivers for any of the radios are loaded at this point. The device is as secure as you can get it without a Faraday cage. So from recovery mode, I'm going to go back into my tool here. And like I said, it's just a couple of simple shell scripts. And there is a shell script specifically to boot the device and remove the passcode. So I'm going to type in sh space boot-passcode.sh, and that's going to fire off my little shell script here when I hit enter. Now, when you first run the script, it kills iTunes for you just in case it's running because it could conflict a little bit. And with the 3GS, there are a couple of ways that we boot up this passcode bypassing tool. Now, the passcode bypassing tool and all of the other tools that are on the iPhone, they work pretty much kind of like the way that a USB keychain would work or a CD-ROM would work, only since the iPhone doesn't have a USB slot, we create a RAM disk that's got a tool that will just mount the disk and remove the passcode. So that's what we're doing. And then we use a few other tools that have been written by a gentleman named Joshua Hill. One is called Inject Purple, which was for iPhone 3GS running 3.0. And 3.1 uses a new tool, which we haven't released yet, called Inject Green. These tools modify the bootloader so that they essentially interrupt the boot chain, allowing us to boot our own password-breaking RAM disk. So when you hit enter, what this is going to do, and I'm going to pull the camera back up here so you can see it, is at this point the phone is going to stay in recovery mode. But we've got a number of things going on over here. We're sending a custom RAM disk onto the phone. We're going to be uploading the patched kernel that our scripts automatically created from the Apple firmware that you downloaded with iTunes. It's going to send the boot sequence necessary in order to actually boot the phone up into our passcode RAM disk. It's going to warn us once that we need to disconnect and reconnect the USB. That'll reset the USB chain. And the whole process only takes about 30 or 40 seconds. As soon as it's done, and I'll show you here on the phone, you'll see a spinning indicator. It'll be just a few more seconds here, and that'll demonstrate that the RAM disk is actually running on the phone. Once that's done, once the RAM disk is done doing its job and removing the passcode, it's going to reboot the phone, and when it comes back up, there shouldn't be a passcode on the device. Now, if you've been keeping up with some of the, there have been numerous bulletins out. I think VulnWatch had one and a few others regarding the iPhone passcode vulnerability. It's not really a vulnerability. I want to make that clear. This is a design flaw. As a consumer, I would certainly love to see Apple fix these things. The real problem with the iPhone is that all of the frontline security is done on a user interface level. And by user interface level, I mean it's just in the GUI. The passcode isn't tied to the disk encryption. The passcode is not tied to any of the low-level components of the phone. It's essentially just a little, it's a GUI hack, essentially, to just disable this passcode. And I won't release the details of it, but, so far every single version of iPhone firmware has been subject to it, not because of a vulnerability, but just because it's poor design. And so, obviously I would love to see Apple fix this, but from a law enforcement perspective, you've now got a phone that is, you've bypassed the passcode. At this point, the tool has also gone and removed the backup encryption, so if you were to create a triage backup, it would be unencrypted. And I've got a few YouTube videos out there that demonstrate this as well. But now, once the passcode has been bypassed, you could go and use Celebrite or any other triage tool to make a backup of the iPhone's live data. And at this point, what you get when you get essentially the same information that you get when you sync with iTunes. And there is a way to even create a backup in iTunes within just a couple of minutes. You get your your address book, you get your call history. The newer versions of iTunes will sync voicemail now. You don't get a few things. You don't get email and deleted data, of course. But within just a couple of minutes, anyone can really make a backup of the essential data that's on an iPhone. So that's the passcode piece here. And the other piece that I wanted to demonstrate was the live recovery. And this is what more people are using to conduct examinations of an iPhone. Because when you do just a basic triage backup, or an iTunes backup, like I said, all you really get is the live data. The live data is good, but it doesn't really tell the whole story. If you've got a high-profile case involving certain pictures on the device or whatnot, or possibly a case that spans over several months, you may need to really dig up that deleted data in order to fully explain the evidence that you do have. Just finding a couple of pictures on the phone doesn't really explain where that evidence came from, how it got there. A lot of the deleted data and the things that you don't see can tell a whole lot more about what kind of evidence you actually have. And so in order to recover a raw disk image off of a 3GS, there's another tool here that we have called Boot Live Recovery. And what this script does is this essentially installs a live recovery agent. It institutes it into the operating system portion of the phone. Or we've got a little 10K agent, I believe it's 2 files. If you are familiar with the iPhone, there are 2 different partitions, 2 logical partitions on the device. One is for the OS, and one is for the user data. Now, the user data is sacred to us. We don't do anything to touch that, and that's, essentially the holy grail of what it is you're trying to get at. But the OS partition is normally in a read-only state from Apple. It's essentially designed to be, read-only and remain in a factory state until you upgrade the phone to some other version that's designed to be in a factory state read-only. For us, we're talking about now a protected area of the device. That's fair game for forensic tools and whatnot. And in fact, if you look at how some of the other commercial tools out there work, if you look at a BlackBerry, for example, Celebrite installs this little recovery agent on the device. You actually see it on a BlackBerry, I believe, as a separate little icon. And a couple other commercial tool manufacturers have started doing the same. So it's acceptable in this field, but it's important to note, the importance essentially of doing this in a protected area of the device. You try and do this on user data, and you will corrupt and stomp all over data. So with that, I'm going to run this little script here. And the script, again, it asks you to put the device in a recovery mode. So you've all seen recovery mode. I'm not going to fire up the camera again and make you watch it. It's going to be just a sec here. And essentially, to get into recovery mode, you power the phone down safely. That allows it to cleanly dismount the disk. And then you hold in power while you connect the USB up. And that fires the device right up into this recovery mode. Okay, so I'm in recovery mode now. Again, these scripts are real easy. You run them, and then it tells you what to do. And as long as you do what it tells you to do, you'll be fine, and it'll do its job. So at this point now, it's using this inject green tool, which interrupts the iPhone's boot chain. And now at this point, we're sending. You can see a bunch of text scrolling by. We're sending a custom RAM disk that includes the live recovery agent. And this is, again, it's like booting from a USB keychain or a CD-ROM, booting, the Helix CD or what have you. Only the way that you do it on the phone is by feeding it into RAM. You send it into the memory of the phone as opposed to, plugging something in. So that's loading. It'll just be a few more seconds here. Once we reset the USB, it's going to upload the patched kernel, which we need in order to run our RAM disk. And again, it's just feeding this into memory. So we're not saving any of this to disk. It gets blown away once you reboot the phone. And at this point now, it says now booting RAM disk, and what you'll see is a little spinning indicator on the phone. When that is complete, the phone will reboot, just like it did when we broke the passcode on the device. Now, when the phone reboots, at this point, the live recovery agent, it's installed in the OS of the device, but it's inactive. And the reason it's inactive is because the kernel that's on the phone, the Apple factory kernel, is being reloaded from the disk again. So unless this person has a jailbroken phone already and they've gone and hacked their phone, which as of right now there is no jailbreak for 3.1 on the 3GS at least, there will be shortly. But if they had jailbroken their phone, the agent would be allowed to run. In most cases, most of the phones I see are not jailbroken when I get them. So Apple's secure kernel is, of course, preventing that live recovery agent to run. So there's one more step that you have to take in order to be able to get your live recovery agent up, and that is to, once again, boot this patched kernel. Now, the kernel patches themselves, they come from a tool called Xpone. And Xpone has a built-in kernel patching function where it can actually go and if you give it an Apple kernel, it will actually go and find the pieces of ARM assembly code that it needs to patch to turn this code signing mechanism off. So, again, you don't actually need any patches. This is just an open source tool that's out there that can generate these patched files for you. So the phone is back up now. And like I said, there's one other thing we want to do. We want to just boot up our own custom kernel at this point. The kernel that we loaded with the RAM disk got blown away when we rebooted the phone. It got flushed from memory. So we need to just feed it back in. And so once again, we place the device in recovery mode. And I got it powered down. I'm plugging it back in while holding in the home button. And once it's in recovery mode, you go and you push enter again. It's going to do its thing. It's going to feed the kernel, this patched kernel, into memory again. It's going to use this inject green tool to interrupt the iPhone's boot chain and redirect it to this unsigned RAM disk. And it's going to boot the phone, boot the phone's operating system, but using the kernel that we sent it into memory. Now, once this is done, you can see here that it's just giving you a couple little how-tos on what to do afterwards. The phone itself takes about 20 seconds or so to actually reboot into this secure kernel. Into this insecure kernel. So now at this point, the phone is rebooted, and I'll show you here. Nothing's really changed on the screen. If you look at it, it's just the same old phone. The GUI is up and whatnot. Now at this stage, it wouldn't matter if we had broken the passcode or not. The phone could say iTunes or connect to iTunes, iPhone disabled, which is what happens if you try too many times, unless it's secure wipes. Or the phone could be prompting you for a passcode, or it could just give you the springboard screen. But it doesn't really matter. At this point, the phone is up and running. It's running a patched kernel now that will run your recovery agent. So in order to perform a live recovery, there's one more script left to run, and that's the recover script. And I'll show you all the script does. It's very simple. There are two programs that need to run. One is called USB-MUX proxy, and you can see here all it really does is it runs it in the background. And what USB-MUX proxy is an open source tool. It was written by a guy who goes by the handle ST3fan. He's on Twitter if you're interested in talking to him. But essentially what it does is it maps USB connections, or it maps TCP across USB. So the iPhone is sitting there listening on a TCP port, on a network port, for just about every service that runs. When you do a sync, when you connect to, for example, there's a daemon called LockdownD, which is responsible for making sure the phone is, in an active state, and it's got, pairing records and whatnot, does all that, those exchanges. These all listen on TCP ports. Apple has got a protocol that they seem to call USB-MUX, which is sort of a mapping. It's almost like the TCP protocol, only it allows you to map those connections, those TCP network connections, across the USB to a domain socket sitting on your Mac desktop. And so what USB proxy does is it just sort of maps that connection. It brokers a tunnel on one port on your local machine to another port that's on the iPhone. The live recovery agent is now, when it's running, is going to be listening on port 7, which is the echo port on the iPhone. And so what this command does is it essentially maps port 7 on the iPhone to your local desktop on port 7777, and it maps that tunnel across USB. So that's the first command that runs. And then the second command is it's a desktop client. Oops, I missed that. It's a desktop client that is very lightweight. I wrote it myself, and the source code is available. But essentially all it does is it connects to whatever you tell it to connect to, and it waits for data. When it receives data, it goes and writes that to disk. In this case, the data that it's going to receive, once it connects to the live recovery agent, it's going to receive the raw disk of the iPhone, and it's just going to go and write that to disk. So you could run these two commands yourself manually. I've kind of consolidated them into this one command. When you run it, it goes and it establishes this proxy, builds this tunnel up, and then you can see here it says downloading user image. That essentially is the desktop recovery client receiving data from the live recovery agent. And the 3GS is remarkably fast. I thought when we first did some examinations, I thought we were going to have like a 4 or 5 hour transfer time, but because the processor in the 3GS is so much faster and the hardware encryption is hardware based now, we're getting between, I'd say, 18 to 20 megasecond, which allows us to transfer an entire iPhone, a 32 gig iPhone, within about a half hour, 45 minutes. Now it's a variable rate, as you can see, so it's going to change a little bit, but it takes a surprisingly small amount of time to transfer the entire raw disk image across.